I'd say in turn it's a great honour to be launching this book. I think we owe Mark and William Lyons, his co-author, a great debt of gratitude for publishing a clear, concise, punchy and accessible book about the great undiscussable issue in modern Australian politics. I started getting concerned about population when I read Paul Ehrlich's book 40 years ago, and I remember a few years after that, Limits to Growth made the obvious point that no species can increase its population without limit in a closed system, and they predicted that if the growth trends in population, resource use, industrial production, agricultural output and pollution were all to continue, we would reach limits within 100 years, and that the most likely result would be a sudden disintegration socially, economically, environmentally in the early decades of the 21st century. And in the last few months, there have been two analyses, one by Graham Turner of CSIRO and one remarkably by two American economists, that have both concluded that all of those parameters, population, resource use, agricultural output, industrial production, pollution, have all increased along the lines of the Limits to Growth Standard World Model, which predicted collapse in the early years of the 21st century. And I think history will probably see the global financial crisis as the first manifestation of the fact that humans are living beyond the sustainable capacity of natural systems. I think we've been blinded to the population issue in Australia by some enduring myths. One is that we have a wide brown land, we've boundless plains to share, a line that Mark has previously criticised, suggests that since we're physically a similar size to the continental United States and they accommodate 300 million people and 200 million guns, if only we were sufficiently ambitious, we could also have 300 million people and 200 million guns, without taking account of the fact that we have old and extensively leached soils which are very unproductive. When I was young, the line used to be, in the aftermath of World War II, that unless we populate our empty north, it'll be overrun by the teeming hordes in the crowded islands to the north of Australia. And I thought that was quite a convincing argument until I heard a radio talk by the late Cyril Pearl nearly 50 years ago, in which he made the obvious point that our empty north was empty and the islands to the north of them were crowded for thousands of years before Europeans set foot in Australia. And there are very good biophysical reasons why Java is crowded and Arnhem Land has a relatively low population, which is that Java has rich, deep volcanic soils and can support tens of millions of people. And Cyril Pearl said that saying we have to populate our empty north or the Indonesians will overrun it would be a bit like the Nigerians saying we better populate the Sahara Desert or Algeria will overrun it. It just doesn't make any sense. I think also politicians have been reluctant to talk about population because it trespasses on two areas which have always been politically sensitive, our reproductive behaviour and migration. And migration is sensitive because it has been used by politicians to blow the dog whistle and incite racist tendencies, and reproductive behaviour has always been something that politicians are very reluctant to discuss in public. As a result, there is a common misconception that because the number of children per woman has steadily declined since women gradually got more control of their fertility, starting about 45 years ago, so that the average adult woman is now producing about 1.8 children. This has led to a myth that we're not replacing ourselves, that our population is in decline. And it's based on a simplistic notion that assumed that the number of adult women were constant, and therefore the only factor we needed to consider was the number of children per adult woman. And of course, with the number of adult women still increasing, as Mark points out, in every year for the last 30 years, the number of births has exceeded the number of deaths by about 120,000. Now, John Howard and Peter Costello were so alarmed by the fact that the number of births was only exceeding the number of tax by about 120,000 a year, that they decided to encourage women to have more children by offering financial inducements and facile slogans like one for mum, one for dad, one for Peter Costello. And this gave the impression that we needed to get out there and reproduce or our population would be declining. And the Howard government actually used our rate of population increase at Kyoto to argue for Australia to have the most generous climate change target of any developed country, by saying that because our population was increasing rapidly, we needed a more generous target. So, as in so many things, the government spoke with forked tongue. It was saying that we weren't replacing ourselves, so we need to provide financial incentives for women to have more children, but at the same time saying, because our population is increasing rapidly, we need a generous greenhouse target. Of course, the government, as well as providing incentives to have more children, increased the level of skilled migration. It gave the public perception that it was being tough on migrants by quite unconscionable treatment of refugees, at the same time as we were letting in more than 100,000 allegedly skilled migrants or business migrants. And the Rudd government has actually continued both of those policies. They've increased the baby bonus and they've increased the level of skilled migration. So as Mark recently pointed out, our population, which had only been increasing at about 250,000 a year, only in Adelaide every 4 years, last year increased by 400,000. And if you do the sort of exercise that John and I were talking about earlier, if you thought about what our government's doing, you would conclude that we are actively engaged in the process of trying to double the Australian population by later this century. Now, in every Australian city, there is now a perception in the community that their quality of life is being eroded by growth. And wherever the citizens have been given a chance to vote, as in the mayoral election on the Sunshine Coast recently, which was really a referendum on the future, people have voted overwhelmingly for slowing down the rate of growth, for maintaining quality of life, for maintaining social cohesion, for maintaining our natural assets. That's what the community believe, but as Mark's book says, governments and media dither and deny. I think that's being too kind, actually. I don't think they're dithering and denying. Dithering and denying is standing by a fire without calling the fire brigade. I think governments and media are tipping petrol on the fire. They aren't dithering and denying, they're actually stoking the fire. They are encouraging reproduction, they are increasing migration targets, and the media, rather than critically examining the costs and benefits, simply trots out mindless drivel about the benefits of growth, and they talk about dynamism contrasted with stagnation, as if the only alternative to stoking up population is a grim future in which we're in the dark on earth floors. So this book, I think, it should be, if not on your desk, in your shoulder holster, because we all engage in conversations with our neighbours, our workmates, our relatives. I keep hearing in South Australia, well, our kids won't have jobs if the population isn't increasing faster. Your Premier is almost beside himself with despair because you have the lowest rate of population increase of any state, whereas in the outer suburbs, people have beside themselves with despair at the way their quality of life is being eroded by the constant urban sprawl. So I think all of us who are concerned about the issues need to engage in the debate, and we need the sort of factual basis, the sort of arguments for countering the spin and orchestrated bullshit of established interest that Mark and William's book gives us. So I'm delighted to see the book launched. I'm proud to be here at the launch, and I'm proud to congratulate Mark for bringing this important book into the world. When ageing dowagers used to launch ships, they used to bust a bottle of champagne over the bows and say, "God bless her and all who sail in her." We don't have a bottle of champagne, but picture me cracking a metaphorical bottle of champagne over the book and saying, "Gaia bless her and all who use her to campaign for stabilising our population and getting back in balance with natural systems." Thank you very much.